In this insightful episode of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, hosts Andreas Wieman and Tim Keefe delve into the evolving role of middle management within modern corporations. As companies increasingly look to cut costs and streamline their organizational frameworks, the traditional middle management layer finds itself under scrutiny. Tim and Andreas explore a series of recent articles and real-world experiences that highlight the challenges and strategic importance of middle managers in balancing employee engagement and operational efficiency. They discuss the broader implications of reducing this layer, the unintended consequences on company morale, and how businesses might better support these crucial team leaders in a changing corporate landscape. Join them as they unpack the complexities of middle management's role in driving company success and employee satisfaction.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast with myself and my counterpart, lesser known Tim Keefe. Tim, why don't you let our listeners know what we're going to be talking about this week? Pretty intense subject, I think.
Well, yeah, we'll see how intense it is, but thanks for that great introduction, Andreas. Always good to catch up with you again, and really fun to be back on our Stop Doing Stupid Stuff conversations. What we want to talk about this week is, there's been a series of articles over the last couple of months really talking about middle management and companies, and in some companies they're actually in an effort to reduce costs, flatten the organization, eliminating this layer. And I think this is a fascinating topic. It's got a lot of nuances to it. And let's just see where we go with it. So, Mr. Andreas?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can go back and listen to some of our, I feel like I'm a robot saying this because I know I've said it on the past couple of casts, but it's true. Go back and listen to a few of our podcasts, from this time last year, as a matter of fact, or even earlier this year. We talk about this subject because we're seeing it. We're consulting on it, and as companies look to cut costs, right, without impacting revenue and revenue outlooks, which is a whole nother conversation to its own, and the volatility, if you're publicly traded, the volatility that it introduces with missing or increasing sales outlooks. All this pressure is on large enterprises and companies, and what they're doing to cut costs is saying, oh yeah, we don't need this role anymore. This person can pick it up. They do enough already, but here we're going to give them some more stuff to do. Are we going to give them training? Nah, training would take too long. We don't have it. They'll figure it out. They're really smart. I am being a bit facetious, obviously, but I'm also not being facetious because things are working out. That's the reality of it.
Well, you're not being facetious at all. I mean, you and I have seen this. I remember I was working with this company, big call center company, a couple of years ago. And, their target for first level managers was to be doing roughly 90% of their job was meant to be coaching. They would have anywhere from 16 to 25 direct reports that they were responsible for. And they also had a reporting requirement to provide coaching, to at least 30 minutes of coaching to every member of their team every month. Okay, well, that sounds great on paper, right? That's the right thing to do. They should be working with their team to identify ways they can be better. What do they need? What are the resources they need, et cetera? That was not what was happening, though. The reality was those same first level supervisors were being tasked with all kinds of administrative reporting, building spreadsheets, et cetera. And if anything, they were totally sandbagging the coaching for the month. They would wait.
Well, what you're telling me is they were box checking to get credit for their 30-minute coaching session with upper management was like, oh, they're getting their coaching done without anybody connecting it back to the actual outcomes of why you do coaching in the first place. I don't believe you, Tim. I don't think that ever happens. No company would be that stupid.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's very true. I'm probably making it up. But from direct observation, I'd say that this is actually very common. And even, and I know you're being facetious, but it's just this insanity of, we have these employees that we all acknowledge that if the employees that we're spending money to bring on board, right, we've gone through this whole process to justify the hiring of this person in this job, we need this person to do the work that we're paying them to do. Otherwise, why bother? Okay, great. Then people say, well, if they're doing the work, then why do they need, supervision to do the work? And they go, yeah, you're probably right. Let's make this all AI. And we know how well that's going to work. And here
Well,
we
we're
are.
seeing it now. To your point, we're seeing it. Let's spend a few $100 million and we'll throw AI on it, and
Well, it's
great.
it's
I'm seeing all the forecasts for Q4, especially in retail in the US, and everybody's like, oh, AI is gonna pump our sales up right now. I mean, everybody's calling me and saying, look, we don't need you, we got AI.
yeah.
Again, my
Well,
facetious streak continues with that, by the way.
no, and in fact, we've seen kind of the drop in interest in AI as people started to see what the cost of implementation and the timelines were, versus just working with your team to make people more productive, but making people more productive not through punishment, but by positive means. We have this fascinating Gallup report that we keep going back to that says on average 30% of the workforce globally is actually engaged in their work. That means 70% of the people out there that are taking a salary are doing the bare minimum to get by every day. And if you built a factory and you were operating at 30% capacity for your factory, you'd get fired. And so what we aren't seeing, at least I haven't seen it in ways that are really, we see little pockets of organizations recognizing the need to helping employees get engaged, but they're really struggling as to what employee, which employee, how do they know, and then what do they do about it? It's just not an easy, and it's not a one-time a year anonymous survey that says here are the trends, blah blah. And it's not. You got to deal with the Tim, right? Like the Tim is disconnected, disengaged, distracted. He's not there to do his job, and whether he's working at home, return to office, or hybrid really doesn't matter. I mean,
Yeah.
I used to watch people come into the office, in the pre-pandemic days. People would, show up at 8:30, read the newspaper back in the days when we had physical newspapers for an hour and a half, go have coffee. And then maybe around 11 o'clock, they might sit down and actually do some real work for half an hour, 45 minutes, and it was lunchtime. But and I'm not exaggerating that this is actually not that uncommon. And people say, well, that's so, you only see that in really large companies where people can hide in the shadows. And I would argue that that's not so true anymore. And then they blamed it on, work at home causes that, right? When people aren't getting under direct supervision, they get lazy, they get disconnected, they don't work as hard. So I'll have to bring them back to the office.
Well, it's a key word that you just said right there. It's lazy. Like I'm gonna be facetious, but purposefully facetious here. It's lazy. In the exact scenario that you just described, all you need to get started, and I'm gonna simplify it, but it's implementing it and actioning it. That's your culture. That's your company culture. So you need something to measure the qualitative side of things, the employee side, and it can't be this stupid once a year survey. And look, I'm gonna openly challenge any of our listeners. Go find someone who disputes what Tim and I's logic is and position is on this, and we'll have them on this show, and we'll debate it with them. I don't know if debate's the right word. We'll talk about it with them. I want to sound confrontational, but I think that's how solutions are going to come out, is if we conversate more and we share our empirical data, not just making stuff up, and we're not able to go back and research it, or it takes us a week to research it and debunk what was just said when the damage has already been done, through that week. But let's have a conversation with people that have ulterior points of view, because at the end of the day, I'm certainly open to learning new points and new points of view, new data points and points of view from people. But you need qualitative measurement that's frequent enough and varies enough to where you have good volunteered participation from your staff, so you really know how they feel about stuff. Because when they volunteer that's really, really important. These once a year surveys, you got HR managers who are like, all right, we got to hit 85% completion or 85% completion, and so managers get on, and it's kind of the crap rolls downhill type of approach that we used to joke about, that kind of subsided a bit for a few years, and now it's bigger than it's ever been, I think, at least in my experience. Sorry, were you gonna say something, Tim?
No, no. I'm just agreeing with you. I just think we're back in the same thing of we're box checking that we did a survey. We're not listening, actually listening to what's going on. And then the other big thing is what are we doing about it, right? Like we had a great example. We have a client, big healthcare provider, and that we can actually name now, Johns Hopkins, that we're doing an voice of the employee project with. And they had a high performing employee that was was having a real challenge. Suddenly, they were doing qualitative pulse checks every week. They could see that this individual's engagement with work dropped off dramatically, and yet they were talking to her. People were, her supervisor was saying, geez, I talk to her every day. I'm wondering what's going on. Well, what we found out was that the individual's car had been stolen, and all the stress of that and trying to get to work every day and taking public transit and while trying to figure out how they were going to get their car replaced was putting a tremendous amount of stress on the individual. But even the individual said, it's not work stress. This is external to work. So I'm not asking you, my boss, to fix this for me. And yet it had a direct impact, a rather significant direct impact on the performance of that team during that period of time. And wow. And then the next question was, well, geez, in a lot of places it would be like, yeah, not my problem, right? Yeah. Like, oh, you deal with it, and I expect you to step it up, and sorry you're distracted outside of work, but you got to get your job done. That would have been kind of the old day thing. And what I thought was powerful, and not through our coaching, but the manager said, geez, I'm happy. We'll pay for your Uber ride each morning, your car share ride each morning and evening, so that we can take that stress level off you, allow you to deal with the other things that you have to deal with. And guess what? Her work performance kicked back up again. And even more importantly, that story got shared across the entire organization.
Exactly. That's what my comment around the culture is. And I think, in the old days, or even now, I don't want to say the old days because it's happening again now, you would say, well, there's liability, there's blah, blah, blah. There's like, there are ways around that. And if you want your, what I call spheres of influence, like this agent was, have her come in, help her out, help her get there. She's more productive. I guarantee you if you go, and I'm a numbers guy, so in a very qualitative measurements, objectively measured guy, if you go look at the productivity that she produced, and then also her being that sphere of influence with this story being shared, how the rest of her peers felt about Johns Hopkins by doing this for them, that they genuinely care about them, then all the productivity, rose. I was thinking about the right way to say rise there. Rose. It's going to pay for the Uber, easily. And then the morale that's there, like that's the new generational divide that we have between boomers and Gen Xers that are, analog and slightly getting into digital and then digital. That's how a lot of the workforce is responding to. And that's the circumstances that we're facing right now. I'm going to sound a bit cynical when I say this. You got to kind of care about people. Even if they're your employees, treat them like your employees 100%. Well, but treat them right.
It's funny, we've used the word a couple of times here now that you really don't hear much anymore, which is morale, right? Like, what does the word morale mean? And, there was an old joke, and I'm going to date myself, but it used to be very common in the 80s. It was kind of like the beatings will continue until the morale improves. It's kind of like we'll keep threatening to punish you to improve your engagement, your output, whatever, but we're doing it through punishment rather than what is it? I think the more important question is, and this is what good leaders are saying, which is, what do you need from me as your leader for you to be more successful in creating the value for our customers? And too often what we're getting is this cult of personality where the leaders believe that they're the only ones who know anything. They're the smartest ones in the room. They have to be involved in every single decision. So therefore, kind of like sucks the wind out of anybody to be creative. And, you're at that point in a lot of these organizations, and I don't think you have to go that far in the headlines to see some of them, where I got to believe that people aren't too interested in working there. I mean, they may love the money, right? Like, there's no question about it. We get engaged by somebody who offers me a big check. I'm going to be excited until I realize that it's a super toxic work environment. and it's not where I want to be.
Yeah, but even like mid managers that we're kind of focusing on, right? They have pretty, depending on there's a whole bunch of nuance to this, right? But they generally get paid above whatever the average is in the area that they're employed, and they make pretty good upper middle class, I would say, at least in the U.S. And so what we're seeing though is they're also getting treated like numbers when it comes to cost cutting and budget cuts. And that's the problem, is they're getting all of this workload of people that make more money than them, that maybe are in the level of the matrices organization, one level above them. They're gone now because the company's cutting costs, and now all of
Yep.
their duties are on top of this middle manager who is stressed out of their freaking minds and not given any tools or training to handle the current circumstances and current workload. And now they got a whole bunch of new stuff. And so they're going to be, eventually they're going to be a victim of the environment, what I call the environmental complexity score, which is something that we're working on, right? And an app that we're working on, but the environmental circumstances. And so to your point about let's beat them up until morale improves, it's just so stupid. I don't ever believe it, I shouldn't say ever, because there may be some statistical probability that I would argue is very low, that at a time and place through the past 2 decades, there was a time where that actually occurred, and people were like, "Oh, let me get my stuff together, and we'll figure it out." However, I would say largely the higher probability is what happened is the company took that approach, and they just simply outlasted the environmental circumstances they were facing, and then their financial situation started to improve, and they associated that, they correlated that. That wasn't a causation, that was a correlation, not even a direct correlation, I would argue, but loosely based correlation, that they said, oh yeah, let's just beat the crap out of people, and we'll get what we need.
Right.
So
Well, and you and I have known many of those types of executives that was their style,
yeah.
right? And yet, and to the point where, again, I sit here and I go, we have, particularly now with the millennials and Gen Z, that, well, I would even argue Gen X, where it's very different. My generation was very, very monetary driven. And yet now I see, like, even in my daughters, where it's more about who I work with, what do I do, and they're very, very sensitive to toxic work environments. They all seem to have kind of one foot out the door already, and we see that in a lot of places. People accept jobs and then ghost, or they accept a job and within 2 weeks they already have their resume back out on the street looking for the next opportunity. And why is that? And I think, to your point, words like organizational culture and morale and leadership are not necessarily part of the vocabulary, but rather we have this, I don't know how to lead, I don't know how to drive culture, so let me put in technology that's going to track whether or not people come to the office. I'm going to make people badge swipe to come into the office. Why? Well, because we believe, without any data, that makes us a more productive and effective organization.
Well, they should at least be honest about it, Tim, and say, well, why do I want them to come back to the office? Because I'm too lazy to research and hire the right people to advise me on how to make my work at home operation viable and productive.
Well, that would
Full
be
stop.
good. That would be, but I think that would be unusual. And the
Well,
other
that'd be
thing too
highly
is,
unusual. I agree.
yeah, and I think the other thing too is, they own the building, or they have a multi-year lease, and they want to make sure that they have a justification for that. And then we have other companies, and which aren't making the big headlines in a good way, that I think embraced what they learned during the pandemic around work from home.
Yeah.
Anderson's investment company, actually, I don't know if you saw the headline last week or earlier this week. They were having an office in Miami, and they shut it down because the people weren't coming to the office, and they said, you know what, maybe we don't need it.
Yeah.
Right. And then the statement was, if we need to get together physically, we'll do it. And that's kind of, my philosophy as well, which is we've been running a virtual company for many, many years.
Right.
And if we need to get together physically, there are many, many hotels and conference
There's many
rooms.
options.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean about companies kind of being lazy about, like think about this. I know there's a big angst around the commercial real estate, in especially in urban markets, right? So you're in San Francisco, you're kind of seeing it firsthand there. My kind of view on this, and like, look, first off, I'm not a construction or real estate expert by any means. I don't claim to. I just look at numbers. I'm not sure why there's not more of a conversion that's occurring. And if you look at the height of the typical, I think it's like 18 to 20 feet in commercial buildings versus it's a little bit lower in residential buildings, in high rises, et cetera, which a lot of commercial real estate's in. Why aren't we pursuing a way to make it more of a convertible, these large square meter buildings, convert them into live, work, play environments that's more conducive, that has on-site facilities like a WeWork type of setup that's secure and has secured connections, etc. Why aren't we pursuing like, I'm not seeing that in the news anywhere, and maybe there's a good reason for it. I honestly don't know. So
Well,
if there are good reasons and anyone's
yeah.
listening, feel free to let us know.
Well, one of the challenges is the floor plans don't lend themselves to converting to residential, at least here in San Francisco, they don't. But separate, one of the things that we've seen, and I think it's just a natural, is that the commercial real estate market is going through kind of a resetting of pricing. They had a couple of buildings here in San Francisco that made the headlines because the lease was defaulted on, the owners defaulted on the loan, and the buildings were picked up for 10% of their value. And now, of course, the rents in those environments have dropped dramatically. And guess what's happening? We're seeing new companies go into the space. Yves Saint Laurent made a huge purchase of commercial real estate here in San Francisco because they're having a long-term view. They figure, well, maybe there's a short-term dip, but we want to be well positioned with owning real estate when it comes back up. And I think that's going to be true. I mean, these cities exist not just because of commuters, right? So again, the point that I'm trying to get at is, like we've been talking about, companies, what drove this conversation was companies seem to be looking at the wrong way to solve the problem. Like, oh, I'm going to take out middle management, and because that's a less valuable layer, and somehow they view that. And what they've forgotten is that, that plays an incredibly important role in the effectiveness of the organization, of the people that report to them. Great leaders drive great performance. Now, I'm not saying every middle manager is an effective leader, and they could sure use a lot of help, right? Mm-hmm. They need better training, they need better tools, they need better support from their own managers. But the good ones drive highly effective teams, and we've all seen that.
Highly engaged teams.
Highly engaged, they're top performers, their customers feel great about them. And then right next door, you can look at, here's a less effective middle manager who doesn't have the support they need, or the training, or maybe the natural skills, and you have a dramatically different outcome.
Right.
So I guess what I'm trying to get to is, we've got to look at the people in the organization, and people are just that, right? As human beings, we're not machines. We've got emotional needs. We've got emotional connections. We want to feel good about what we do. And if we're not willing to address that as an organization, and we're just all about attendance, then we can't complain about low productivity.
Yeah, and quality. No, I agree. One, I will say my wife disputes your argument that we're not robots. She regularly calls me a robot, by the way.
Well, in your particular case,
I know I'm the exception. Broken clocks, right?
Yeah.
But here's what I would wrap with, and we'll actually piggyback on to what you just said, because I think that kind of wrapped everything up. I think the difference is, or what is going to help businesses navigate through this, is having the qualitative and quantitative sides. And so if you look at what we have in BalanceWise IQ, that's the listening post for employees on a weekly basis. And what you referenced, the young lady from Johns Hopkins, she used our platform to be able to facilitate that. That was her choice of advancing her voice, right? Because that's what it is. It's a listening post. But then on the other side, we have scorecard IQ, which allows us to measure the productivity in an objectively measured way, the quantitative side. So if you have these two tools that are AI powered, we want to talk about AI powered, then companies can make better decisions. And what I think we're seeing right now is just this imbalance, or no balance. It's completely flat. The balance is the zero marker, right? Of you're not listening to your employees and numbers, objectively measured numbers, revenue, operating costs, etc., continue to miss expectations grossly. So these two things balance each other out and allow for us and allow companies to see more objectively what is the real balance that your business needs, and how can you listen to your people, and how are they taking the listening, how are you taking the listening, showing them you're listening, and then the byproduct is, or maybe not byproduct, but the direct result, the outcome is objectively measured success that is within the realm of your definition of success as a company or an upper management.
Right. No, agreed. And you have to be willing to listen, which is, I have to tell you, is fascinating to me. Just recently, I was talking to a client, and we were talking about like post-sale follow-up with clients, and the reaction from the client, my client, was, yeah, we don't want to do that, because what if they had a bad experience? And you're like, as I bang my head on the table going, yes, that would be the whole reason why we would talk to them and maybe have an opportunity to correct it. But anyway, you have to, it's a tough call. I mean, taking feedback and even constructive criticism can be tough, but you got to be willing to listen.
Agreed.
This is good. Well, thank you, sir. As always, really appreciate your time on our SDSS podcast. And for the listeners, please, like and subscribe. We'd love to get your feedback. If you have comments you want to make, other topics, we'd love to hear more about them. If you have an interesting article you've run across where you think it fits into what we're talking about, or even if it doesn't fit in, Andreas and I will talk about almost anything for an hour. That's okay.
If you can't tell, we both like to talk. And speaking of talking, we got the Employee Experience 2025 coming up on September 19th. So that is at least 2.5 hours of talking, which I'm looking very forward to.
Well, but, hopefully not 2.5 hours, but
my facetious streak continues, by the way, even at the end of the cast. But would love for everyone to attend. Please visit the LinkedIn Live sign up and attend. You get a free Audible version of our book, Stop Doing Stupid Stuff. And we'll look to take questions from you and answer them live with our panel.
Yes, thanks, everybody. And again, we'll look forward to catching up with you next week. And Andreas, as always, it's a good way to start the week. Thanks for the time.
Likewise. Thanks, everybody.